This is Join Us in France, episode 372. 372. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Everyday life in France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel during the pandemic. Today, I bring you a conversation with Annie Gauthier about her river cruise on the Seine River. This river cruise took her to Paris, Rouen, Lisieux, Omaha, and more. Annie was part of a group that was on a Catholic feminist pilgrimage. Now, I must admit that Catholic and feminist are not ideas that go together in my head usually, but this may be a sign that the Catholic Church is evolving with the times, and that would be great news in my book. This gave me an opportunity to get into one of the most horrifying stories of France around the Revolution, the tragic fate of the Chevalier de la Barre. You've probably not heard about him unless you're a serious history nerd, but it's an important story to know about because it speaks to the value of laïcité, or secularism, the French way, which is still hotly debated in France. After the interview, I'll thank my new patrons, but this time I won't share a personal update because there's not much going on in my life other than I am learning a new podcasting procedure that I hope will make the podcast even better. Instead, I bring you a conversation with Lisa Leone about something unfortunate that happened to them. You know that everyone who gets on an airplane needs to get tested 24 hours before boarding. Well, Lisa and her family got tested in Paris, and to her great surprise, one of them was positive. So they were stuck in Paris, and she'll tell us all about it after the interview. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my Paris tours on the VoiceMap app, my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, and my popular itinerary planning service. You can browse all of that at Annie's Boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. And you can follow the show on social media. Just search for Join Us in France. And you'll find show notes for this episode on joinusinfrance.com/372. And you'll find a full transcript of this episode as well, which is new and which is one of the reasons why I have changed my podcasting procedure. Bonjour, Annie Gauthier, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie Sargent. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. How do you say your name in English?
Anne Gauthier, or Annie Gauthier.
Yeah, so it's very close to French. Yeah, Gauthier. It works. It's a very French name, by the way. Do you have French ancestors?
It is. Yes, on every side. I live in Louisiana, so some of my grandparents grew up speaking French, and so French last names, French first names, and middle names are all very common.
Yeah.
My maiden name is a fully French name too. So, yep.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, okay. So today we're going to talk about your river cruise on the Seine. When did you take this trip?
We took the trip in mid to late October 2021.
Okay. And how many were in your group? Was it a family group?
No, so me personally, I traveled with my childhood best friend, who's also my second cousin, so we have the same French maiden name. Anyway, we traveled with, it was a Catholic feminist pilgrimage, so there were like 47 people in our whole pilgrimage group, but just the two of us went over together. We went up a little bit early, and I didn't know anybody else personally in that group until we went to France.
Right. Catholic feminist pilgrimage. That's an interesting combination. Do talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I can't take credit for the name at all. There's a podcaster called Claire Slenarski who hosted a podcast called the Catholic Feminist Podcast, and it was just all about asking the hard questions in this modern world we live in and trying to remain true to our faith, but also advocate on behalf of those who need advocates, be they women or disadvantaged groups or whatever, and just kind of wrestle with stuff. To me, wrestle with the hard stuff of being human.
That sounds really good. I might have to give that podcast to listen just to see what it's like. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, So tell us about how your trip went. Where did you start? Where did you end? Just take it any direction you would like.
My friend Katie and I flew out of our local airport, flew into Paris. She had never been to Europe before, and for me it was a return trip to France. But the first time I went was in 2000, and the second time I went for a day in 2005, and I hadn't been back since. So it had been a while. And obviously neither of us never traveled during, the pandemic conditions. But we landed at Charles de Gaulle, and other than a few minutes of trying to figure out how to actually exit the airport without connecting to another country first, everything went really smoothly. And we took a cab into Paris at your recommendation, so thank you for that. I was glad to, much as I love public transit, I was really glad to not have to think about it after a red-eye flight.
Yeah, that's not the right time to worry about public transportation for most people, unless you've done this a million times, and then it's fine. But if you haven't, no.
Sure. Yeah. Last time I flew into London, I've been to London several times. The last time we flew in there, even with 3 kids and my husband, we took the tube into the city because it just made sense. But
right.
This was different. So
yeah, it's very different in London. I do need to talk about that because I've done this in London a bunch of times. It's very different because in London, the airports are farther away, and it's an actual train that's dedicated to taking people back and forth. Whereas in Paris, the RER is not a dedicated train. It's a commuter train, and you are with a bunch of other people.
For us in London, there were no transfers. It made sense.
Yeah.
But in Paris, it was going to be different. We were going to need transfers to get where we were going because, again, at your recommendation off of your website, we stayed at a hotel in the Saint-Germain neighborhood. So that was really lovely. There was no issue, and they were wonderful. And our room was already ready. They actually upgraded us to a family room, so we could have slept 2 other people, as it happened. But we dropped our bags and set off. After kind of freshening up, we walked over to the Plantézat and started your GPS audio tour.
The voice map tour, yes.
We meandered over toward the river to get started and stopped at a cafe to have our first, but not our last, pain au chocolat and a café crème. But stopped by a few bouquinistes and poked around for postcards to send to our children, which finally came like 3 weeks after we got that. It was a beautiful day. The weather was, I think, in the 60s, blue skies. We really couldn't have asked for a better introduction of Bataclan to Paris. So we spent several hours kind of meandering through the tour. We had to detour because the big trial was going on at the Palais de Justice. And so we detoured and kind of poked around in Samaritan, but that's largely out of our budget range. It was fun to see. It was a really pretty store.
Yeah, it is fun to see, isn't it? I mean, it's like, I couldn't stop laughing in there. All these products, because I was with my sister, and she loves fashion, and so I kept teasing her about stuff. I'm like, why would anybody wear this? Anyway, it was fun.
Yeah. There were some interesting things. There were some pretty things. I enjoyed the juxtaposition. There was like a section for Prada and all this kind of, to me, trendy and fancy clothes, I guess, and glass windows. It was very like modern mannequins and displays, and then through the window you could see an old Gothic church right behind it. So that was kind of a fun juxtaposition. But anyway, we headed back out and kind of walked back over. We got to cross more bridges than I think normally we would because of the detour off the island. But it really enjoyed that tour. It was a great introduction and a great way, especially for us for a first day, to just keep moving. We had arrived midday, and so it got us through the afternoon very enjoyably. And then we found dinner after recommendation from your podcast and your Facebook group at the Saint-Régis.
Yeah.
And after we kind of wandered into the Marais a little bit. There was a secondhand clothing shop she wanted to check out.
Oh, sure. You're right by there.
So we meandered over there and then had dinner, and then we're going to walk back and realized it was like 20 minutes to 9. So I was like, we can catch the Eiffel Tower sparkling on the hour.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was like, let's go ahead and we'll walk back along the river, and then we'll cut back over to the hotel. And I thought it sparkled for 10 minutes. Note to listeners, it's 5.
Yes, it's 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes. Not quite 5 minutes, actually, because I timed it this time. It's like 4 minutes and 39 seconds or something. And it is on the hour as soon as it gets dark.
Yeah.
And until midnight, usually.
Yeah. So we knew that we had been able to see the Eiffel Tower from the Pont des Arts when we started. So we walked back down there, but we kind of got distracted by a few pretty things along the way. And I saw it sparkling as we were running, kind of jogging onto the bridge. And then by the time we got where we had a full view, it had stopped.
Right, right.
I was like, that's okay. We have other days to see it. So anyway, but the next morning we picked up with another one of your tours. Since we're in the Saint-Germain area, we walked over to the start of that tour and did most of it, and then had to kind of cut it a little bit short because we needed to join the pilgrimage group over by the Arc de Triomphe. So we headed over there and joined them, and they dropped us off by the Bon Marché shopping center. So we enjoyed shopping and a picnic in a little garden near there.
Oh, so you went into that church with the magic medallions.
We did. Well, so we didn't do that one that day. We did have mass there on our final day of the pilgrimage, but on the first day, they dropped us at the Bon Marché, the Grande Épicerie, for a few hours to just, kind of orient ourselves and browse and enjoy. So, like I said, we bought some sandwiches. We split a croque monsieur and a baguette, ham and butter, so jambon beurre. We split a couple of sandwiches and some bottles of water in the park. It was another beautiful day. And then we went to the pilgrimage kind of started, I guess. We went to Mass at the Chapel of St. Vincent de Paul. And then on the following Friday, we did go to the Chapel of the Miraculous Medal, which is different. So they're just a block or two apart, but two different churches. So
yeah, which goes to show you that there are churches all over Paris, everywhere.
Yes. Absolutely. There was another church nearby.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That a friend of mine had recommended I go see that also had relics in it, which we never did make it to, but it was like another 5 or 10 minute walk. And we had already been inside that day, courtesy of your tour, Saint-Germain-des-Prés Church, and walked by Saint-Sulpice. So none of which are all that far from that area either.
Right.
But yeah, so then we got to do one of the other things we were excited about, which was get on the cruise ship. The boat was docked like 3/4 of a mile west of the Eiffel Tower.
Okay.
So a great unobstructed view of the tower. And so we got settled and had dinner and then walked off our dinner and actually managed to see the Eiffel Tower sparkle that night at 10. So it was just kind of fun. It was probably my kid's most memorable FaceTime call of the trip as I FaceTimed them after it had been sparkling. I was like, I'm going to get really tired of just watching the sparkle for 5 minutes. So I called them and that was fun. They were just getting out of school. So because they did obviously not come with us. So.
That's great. So what was the name of the ship and the cruise company?
So the cruise company was Croisi Europe, Croisi Europe.
Okay.
And the ship was the MS Renoir.
Okay.
Like the artist.
Was that good? Was it a nice ship? Have you done river cruises before?
No, I've never done any others, so I thought it was nice, but I have no point of comparison other than we were able to see some other ships because in some of our other ports, including in Paris, we were docked near either, Viking ships or I think an Avalon ship or a couple other companies that I didn't recognize. So I would say our ship probably appeared not quite as luxe as some of those. It was more laid back and casual, but still very nice. And the food that was prepared on board was delicious and amazing. Everybody raves about it. So it was really good, including the French tour guides that were with us. Because we ended up having kind of 2 pilgrimage groups, both on that same boat. The other group was just about 20 people. So I think we were almost 70 people altogether. And they had a French tour guide, and we had a French tour guide, a native Parisian. And he did encourage us to enjoy the food on the ship because it was very good.
Yeah. And you've paid for it besides,
We did, yeah. Obviously, it was included. And we stayed docked in Paris at night, and the following day, actually spent the day in Paris. That morning, we visited as a group outside of Notre Dame. So we were back in some of the same places that Katie and I had walked the day before. And then we took a bus over to the Montmartre area. And we opted to climb the stairs instead of taking the funicular up to Sacré-Cœur. And it was, it is not for the faint of heart.
What is it? 100 steps or something? I think it's about 200 steps.
I wanted to look it up so I could tell my kids that, and I never did look it up. But yeah, that sounds about right. It felt like about 1,200 at the time. It's a great way to bring us to prayer. before going into the church because it took some prayer to finish those last few steps. But yeah, so then we were in Sacré-Cœur for a while. We had a private mass there and a chapel down in the crypt. And then I liked this tour because we had a lot of time to just be on our own as well in the different places. So the rest of that day was at Lisieux. And we actually met up with some French family friends who came. They live just east of Paris. And so they drove in and we enjoyed crepes with them at a creperie in Montmartre down the hill. So that was really lovely. My friend, I speak some French, but I'm not fluent. Like me, grew up hearing some French, and we were taught it in school. Grammar, basic vocabulary and basic grammar from first grade almost through to high school. So she had some familiarity. Like she said, I can read menus and I can read signs, but she's not conversationally fluent. And the husband and wife that we met, the wife is completely fluent in French and English. The husband has about as much English as my friend does French. So we had a great franglais or Fringlish lunch for 2 hours, and it was great. The language sometimes was the source of that laughter, and sometimes we laughed despite the language.
That's good.
So it was a lot of fun. For anybody who's got anxiety about the language, I would say set that aside and just go. Yeah. So, I mean, all the shopkeepers, all the waitresses, really anybody that we encountered, we didn't have any negative experience.
Right. So how long did it stay docked in Paris?
So we were docked in Paris again that evening. So we did walk around again that evening after visiting the Louvre that afternoon for a little while. And then we set sail.
Oh, so they took you to the Louvre on the ship?
No, our French friends dropped us at the Louvre. We were planning to get back there under our own steam. But no, we had that whole afternoon at Lisieux. We had a dinner that night on the ship. And we technically didn't have to return to the ship until, I think, 6 a.m. the next morning when it was cutting sail.
Right.
We, of course, did.
Right.
But yeah, so and enjoyed that and then set sail the next day for Poissy to transfer to Versailles and visited the palace for a few hours in the gardens for a bit. We didn't go out to the Marie Antoinette's Hamlet or anything further afield. But we had a guided tour through the palace and then went to Mass at a church in the city of Versailles and then transferred back to the ship to keep sailing. And we only sailed during the day. And from what I saw in the other ports, like ships seemed to dock. That seemed to be pretty normal. So they would dock for the evening and then set sail again in the morning. I don't know if that's 100% typical, but that was what we did. We never sailed at night.
So I wanted to ask you, between Poissy, off the top of my head, I don't know how far Poissy is to Versailles.
It was probably, I didn't time it, but I would say we were probably on the bus for 30 to 45 minutes. Okay. It wasn't really long, but it wasn't really quick either. It may seem an odd introduction into a Catholic feminist pilgrimage to visit the Palace of Versailles, but it's interesting to, I guess, contemplate the excesses of wealth and the just, again, how do humans organize ourselves and how do other people react when those who have power use it in certain ways. So it kind of fit there.
French kings were very pious for the most part.
Sure. It was just such an important part, I think, of the French, I guess, patrimony, or just to see the beauty of the palace and the garden. So it was lovely.
Very good.
So the following day we were in Rouen. Yeah, we sailed to Rouen and had, again, a little overview walking tour of the city by our guide who took us in front of the cathedral and in front of a couple of other significant churches, including the newer and very modern and Viking ship-inspired, apparently, Church of Saint Joan of Arc. And then we had the rest of that day pretty much on our own in Rouen to explore. And it was really a lovely city. It was the only day that we really got rainy weather. But it didn't really rain until right when it was about time to get back on the boat.
Yeah. Rouen is one of the nicest towns in France.
It was beautiful. Yeah, it was very nice. We really enjoyed our time there. And then we sailed the next day. We got off the boat. I'm trying to remember where. We met a bus again, and the bus took us out to Omaha Beach. So that was obviously a longer bus ride. That was about 2.5 hours. And then the ship kept sailing during the day, and we met it back a little further up. So it was just 2 hours where we returned, which was in Côte-de-Bec-en-Caux, which looked really charming. That's where we picked the boat back up. So we had a little bit of time there. But we enjoyed lunch on our own, in Port-en-Bessin near Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to be on the coast and just kind of see something different after city and, in Versailles and then Rouen and then to get out to the coast. And then obviously.
So did you have a tour guide at Omaha Beach?
We did. So the French tour guide that was with our group, he followed our group the whole way. So he guided us around Paris. He guided us around Rouen, at Omaha Beach every day along the way. He was our guide. So he was with us the whole way through.
Very nice.
So, yeah. And then we sailed on to Honfleur that night and docked and stayed docked in Honfleur for 2 nights. So the following day we started with a walking tour again around Honfleur, and then we had Mass and then had the day at Lisieux in Honfleur, which was, we were really sad to have left Rouen, but really fell in love with Honfleur as well. And we had hoped to visit a market and missed on that in Paris. And so we were glad to be able to see a small market in Honfleur and buy a little bit of fresh fruit and some pastry there, and then climbed a hill up to an old church. And it was a pretty steep hill. My friend was encouraged. She says, this man with this little dog just passed us, and if that little dog can make it up the hill, then so can I. And I almost didn't have the heart to tell her that the man was now carrying the little dog whose tongue was hanging out of his mouth. But we did make it all the way up. So views toward the English Channel and down over the delta of the river were really beautiful. And the church was lovely as well. And that was fun. But then we went back down. It started drizzling. But it was very scenic and atmospheric. We bought a lot of salted butter caramels and chocolates. And it was where we kind of stocked up on goodies to bring home to the kids and our husband.
So, Honfleur is very popular. It's a beautiful touristy town. I mean, honestly, it's what it is.
Yeah. And that's what our tour guide explained, that it caters at this point to both foreign tourists and also to just weekenders escaping Paris. It's far enough to be somewhere else, and it's got a lot of chain shops that are in Paris that also have locations in Honfleur. So we understood that it was maybe, that it was what it was. But it was still lovely for what it was.
Exactly. You still want to go because it's very nice. The reason why it got so popular is because it's really nice.
It really was.
Yeah.
It was charming. And again, we had great interactions there. By then we were almost a weekend, and so I was a lot more reliant on my French. We actually did run into several shopkeepers there who, according to them, did not speak English. So my friend was relying on me for some translation there as we, tried to understand about some of the products we were buying or whatever. But again, I think without me, she would have managed to sign language and smiles and patience and pointing go a long way, and trying. So, so.
Okay. What to next?
After that, we got off the boat after 6 nights on the boat, and we drove to Lisieux and checked into a hotel there. And we spent the day there visiting sites associated with St. Therese of Lisieux and her parents, and had a lovely family-style lunch in a building attached to the convent where she had been a cloistered nun, and so that was nice. And it was bigger than I thought it would be. I don't know why in my head it was a smaller place, but visited several churches again there, and had Mass in the crypt of the basilica there. And the basilica was really beautiful. It was very stunning. Both the main part of the church and then the crypt down at the bottom. Different experience to the crypt below Sacré-Cœur. So it was just really beautiful, and enjoyed again some time on our own that afternoon there. And then the next morning we were headed back to Paris for our final night. Some of the group kept going down to Lourdes, but we didn't. That wasn't going to fit for us on this trip, but we transferred to Paris on the bus, still with our same tour guide, but we went by way of Chartres to see the cathedral there, and we had a few hours at Lisieux there as well. So I had a delicious lunch at a creperie there. I think we enjoyed crepes for our meals 3 or 4 or 5 times on the trip.
Yeah, it's fun. Those are good and inexpensive usually, and fast.
It was quick and easy. Yeah, it fit with the time frames we had, and we got to try different flavor combinations. We had several savory ones. We had dessert crepes a few of the times as well. We were never disappointed with anything we tried. So that was a lot of fun. And then back into Paris, which seems like we had just left, and also seems like we'd been gone for a year as we returned, and it ended right back where we'd started, with the bus parked in the same place near the Bon Marché shopping center. And that time we did go to Mass at the Chapel of the Miraculous Medal, and I got to attend some services that were going on there in French prior to Mass.
Good.
And So yeah, it was our last night, but on Wednesday I had called. This was kind of the ultimate test of my French. I'd called and made a reservation completely in French for us to spend the night at the hostel attached to Sacré-Cœur. Someone had shared about that on your Facebook group a couple of years ago before I even knew we were going. And so I was hoping I had successfully made that reservation. And if not, we could have returned to our hotel. But Katie and I checked into the hotel, got freshened up, and then took just our day bags and took a cab up to Sacré-Cœur and checked in for that. And so spent the night at Sacré-Cœur and had access to the church throughout that night.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's very unusual.
It was a neat way to it's obviously not going to be for everybody. Obviously, a lot of things over part of this trip are not going to be for everybody, and nor should they. As far as, to me, the beauty of the world is we're all different.
Exactly.
But it was a very fitting way for the two of us to finish out that trip.
Right.
And
I think it's really important for me to emphasize that this is only for pilgrims. I mean, this is for people who want to go to Sacré-Cœur to pray.
Yeah.
No other reason.
Correct. There's the way it worked. We weren't sure how it was going to work, and there was a mass service, obviously in French, at 10 o'clock that night. And then after they gave a few minutes, they kind of started to shut the lights down. They gave a few minutes before they went around and actually checked to make sure that people had permission. We had to show either a card that they had given us or our keys to stay there, and they asked everyone else to leave and move them out, and then shut the lights down all around the cathedral, and then kind of use velvet ropes to cordon off, like basically we could go to the walkway to the hostel, and the only lights were, up on the altar for adoration, because the ability to stay in the hostel is attached to participating in Eucharistic adoration.
Right.
So it is, absolutely for pilgrims. But there were several school groups or scouting groups that were there, because there are dormitory rooms as well as more private rooms. So for anybody, if that ticks your box, I'd really recommend it. It was a wonderful and moving experience. If you just want to tour the church as a tourist, then definitely they're open basically during daylight hours.
Sure.
So go then and have full access.
Yeah. So what was your favorite church that you saw this whole time? You saw a lot of churches. Did you have a favorite?
We did. So probably my favorite was the Basilica in Lisieux, the Basilica for St. Therese. It was beautiful when we were there. It was very not crowded, so it didn't feel touristy at all. Obviously, it is a site for tourists and pilgrims alike, but it was just really a stunning place and a very peaceful place. So, and a close second to that would probably be the little church that I had never heard of until right before we climbed the hill in Honfleur, which is Notre Dame de Grâce. So, Our Lady of Grace. It's an old, well-used church. It's obviously a lot of sailor associations and boating associations, since it's right there on the coast. So.
Yeah. Usually that's how it works. Was there a lot of singing along the way?
So we didn't meet up with any foreign choirs, but there were several women in our group. And everybody in our group turned out was American, and we had brought a priest had come with us as well. And so, actually, between the two pilgrimage groups, we had 3 American priests with us. So we had Mass daily, and our Masses were all in English because they were all conducted by one of our 3 priests. But a lot of the ladies and some of the men who were in the other group who were on our pilgrimage sing beautifully and have experience in choirs or whatever. So there was a lot of impromptu a cappella singing, some outdoors and some in some of the churches, and some had better acoustics than others. But to hear them sing in some of the crypts where the acoustics were difficult actually to hear the spoken words, they were beautiful for the sung words. So it was lovely. But yeah.
And did you have a favorite place in Paris? Some, a place that you were surprised by?
I think I was just surprised by, I guess, particularly the Saint-Germain neighborhood, since that's where we were staying. It felt so, obviously it was beautiful, but it felt so manageable. Like, I wasn't sure. Obviously Paris is a big city, and I hadn't been in a long time. And, when I went before I was a teenager, and didn't know if it was built up in my head to be something that it wasn't going to be. But certainly that area was it wasn't overwhelming.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as much as I love London, sometimes I have stood in London and felt overwhelmed by the sheer size and scope of things. I come from a town of, 1,500 people, and I live outside of that town in the countryside in rural Louisiana. So, there's more people in Paris or London than there are in the whole state I live in. But it was just lovely. It felt very approachable. And I think, as I reflect on this, that your walking tours may have contributed to it feeling manageable and also meaningful, in that we were aware of some of what we were walking by and what we were seeing, to me, really added to the enjoyment of it. So we did even squeeze in some of your Montmartre tour, but kind of backwards as we walked down the hill on that final morning back to our hotel before we headed to the restaurant. We took a few detours just to see places.
So did you get to the place where the Chevalier de la Barre is? At the very end of the... Okay, so I want to know what you thought about that.
So I had listened to all of the voice note tours before I left. So I had some appreciation for what I wanted to see. And I'd kind of forgotten about that story. I'd forgotten that it was there. So we were walking the park. I'm like, oh, let's listen to, we're near some of the stops. Let's listen to that. It's just a crazy story.
So let me explain a little bit. Soon before the French Revolution, there was a young man called the Chevalier de la Barre who was poor. Well, he was noble, but he was not moneyed. He had lost his parents. He was being raised by a family member. And he got into the wrong crowd, kind of. And this crowd of kids were accused of being very disrespectful to a procession of priests who were coming by. They hung the blame on him, and they tortured him and killed him to make an example of him. And this story is often told as one of the reasons why at the French Revolution, French people were so mean to clergy and destroyed a lot of churches, destroyed a lot of church property. I don't know that priests were killed, but probably some were, but it was, they didn't set out to kill them, nuns and priests. But they were pretty awful at the French Revolution to the clergy. And so this is often explained as kind of payback for the Chevalier de la Barre. And when they set up the church at Montmartre, which is, of course, a pretty recent thing for France anyway, so the city of Paris gave permission for this basilica to be built and to be very visible. And it's a basilica where people are, these are fervent Catholics. For example, if you go to La Madeleine Church in central Paris, by now it's mostly a concert hall. There's some mass there, but it's mostly used for concerts. You go to Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre, and it's a church. It's a working church. They want you to be quiet. They have people praying there 24/7. It was set up as a place for friends to ask for forgiveness for the sins of the revolution. Not just the revolution, but also since France had lost to the Austrians in 1870s. They thought that God was punishing France for not behaving. So this church is obviously a very pious church on top of a hill. And so the city of Paris made sure that it is surrounded by reminders of the reasons why we need to keep the Catholic Church in check. But they are very subtle reminders.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Without your podcast, and without that the voice note tour, obviously I had no reference for that. Yeah. Another bookmark for just the excesses of anything or obviously can have terrible consequences.
Yeah. So, both the Catholic Church and the French Revolution did horrible things. But it's interesting that they did it on purpose. They surrounded the Montmartre Basilica with la Rue du Chevalier de la Barre, and then you have a statue right at the foot of the basilica. This was not a coincidence. It happened on purpose,
not accidental. Yeah. By design.
And French people who read history know this stuff. And most of the time, tour guides don't talk about this because, it could rub people the wrong way. But I felt it was really important to include it in the tour because it really speaks to French culture in a very big way. It's a big example because people wonder, why are French people so anti-religion, generally speaking? And you can see it there. Although things are changing. French people, I can't say that they're anti-religion because you've seen Lisieux, you've seen Rouen, you've seen stuff for Joan of Arc. These are revered people. So we have both. It's a complicated country.
Good people, right? And people are complicated and history is complicated. And I really, as a history student, a history major in college, I really appreciate, just how visible and tangible history is in France. And that, for better or for worse, we're not going to hide from it. We remember it, and I'm sure they're, whatever it is. So I think those examples are fitting. And it was, again, without your voice map tour, we wouldn't have had that appreciation. Because I'd never heard that story, as an American, even as a history major in college, and from a friend either. So it gave us something to contemplate. If we were listening to that story standing right by the statue as the sun came up in Paris, so it kind of felt like we had Paris to ourselves in the morning as we walked back down to our hotel at the base of the hill. And we did take a detour to see the man walking out of the wall.
Of course. That's another interesting story, and I tell that story in the tour. It's another fun story.
I was looking at the stops, and I was like, "Oh, we have to take this detour." And she was like, "Okay, what are we going to see?" I was like, "A man walking out of the wall." So then I told her, well, she listened to the story. So anyway, so it really did, but it added joy, so much joy to our experience. Otherwise, we would have just walked down the hill to where our hotel was, and instead, we detoured to the Place du Tête, where we heard some stories there. We didn't listen to that whole tour, and we didn't listen to it in order, but we were able
to you got plenty
to listen to the various videos. Yeah.
This is, sometimes people take those voice map tours in the wrong order, and I wish there was a way to start it in a different place. I need to talk to voice map about that, because it would be really interesting to be able to start anywhere and do the loop, but I don't know if technically that's easy or not, but yeah, I'm not sure. I need to ask them.
And for us, it was fine. We just looked at the map. I mean, that's the only one we really did out of order. And, we skipped a few stops around our hotel when we had walked back. And when we did the Saint-Germain, when we walked back into the hotel, we're packing up. We kept listening to the stories, so we could keep on. And then we just kind of picked back up and walked that one. And then we just cut it short. We missed the end. But in Montmartre, we probably listened to half of the Montmartre one, but none of it. A few of them were in order. We'd go through sections in order, and it was kind of move on to the next place. Obviously not how it's designed. It's definitely better to listen to them all in the order.
If you listen in order, it makes your life easier, because I just tell you where to go next, but that's fine. If you can figure it out by yourself, it's fine.
Yeah, we just had the map pulled up, and we knew where we were going, kind of right back down to where we were trying to navigate to. That wasn't difficult. So
yeah. And I know I'm going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, but honestly, these tours, I put a lot of thought into them, and they do help you enjoy Paris better, because instead of walking by stuff and having no idea what you're looking at, I will give you a quick explanation. Now, it's not like, if you're a history buff and you've read a dozen books about this topic, then you're going to go, this was nothing. This is a general introduction to the topics, but I do go into French history quite a bit because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I do too. And I think even for somebody, I am not a French history expert, but I think even for somebody who's got some basic understanding of the history, to tie the geography to the history and to realize, oh, this is the place where that thing happened, or this is connected to that other thing. I think your tours really bring that to life in a really good way. And, it's fearful disclosure. I am not paid for these endorsements. This is my honest opinion. And it added to my friend's enjoyment as well. It was like, look, we don't have to do this. If I was here by myself, this is what I would be doing.
Right.
This doesn't have to be what we do if you want to do something different. And she was like, oh, it sounds great. And I kind of kept checking in with her. I'm like, you still good? She was like, no, this is cool. So we didn't really run around trying to visit attraction after attraction after attraction. Instead, we walked a lot in the city, but instead of merely wandering without appreciating what we were seeing, we kind of, I think, got the best of both worlds, and on our own schedule, which was just amazing. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And there's a ton of people who buy the tour who don't know me from Adam. They don't listen to the podcast. They just get it straight from the app.
Sure.
And they like it too. I mean, it's, it's just interesting stuff. And I take you to the most interesting areas of any given neighborhood. So do you have any more advice for the listeners on things that you would love to do again, or things that you wouldn't do again, maybe?
I don't know that there's anything that we did that I wouldn't do again.
Mm-hmm. That's a good sign.
I would, yeah, no, I mean, it really was a dream. And even, having this couple of bouts of a little bit of rain was nice. It kind of checked us up and gave us a different appreciation for these beautiful cities and gloomy weather too. No, it was good. I've never done organized travel before, so this was So it's my first river cruise, my first organized travel, and my first pilgrimage. So there's a lot of firsts there. My first time to travel as an adult without my family, without having either my husband and or our children with us. And it was really all great. I think, on balance, personally, my style is probably more that of the independent traveler. So I don't think I'm going to stop doing it on my own and start only doing it with tour groups. But I think for my friend and for several of the other women on the trip, having the comfort of knowing we were part of a group, even had it not been a particular group we were part of, made life a lot easier, and that we could see a lot of it. And I really, really, really liked the river cruise because part of what we try to do when we travel is try to come over to Europe. Usually it's been Britain for 2 to 3 weeks at a time if we can, and then have a series of home bases. We don't move around and try to see everything on the whole country in that time frame. We try to go deep in a few places. And so the river cruise kind of gave us, in some ways, the best of both worlds with a short trip because we spent 9 nights in France. So we got to see a lot, but we didn't have to keep losing time to packing up and, repacking and all that kind of thing. We kind of had a home base, but it was a mobile home base. So I'd been interested in that idea for a long time. I would do another river cruise in a heartbeat. There are a lot of rivers in France and a lot of the other ones that have river cruises also. So I've already planted that bug with my husband. So we'll see where that goes.
Good for you.
So that'll probably be one day when the kids are older. Yeah, we've got young kids still at home. So that won't be any time.
Plenty of time for that.
Yeah, but no, my biggest advice would be if you want to go, just go.
Yeah, just go. Thank you so much, Annie. That was really interesting and pretty new because we hadn't talked to anybody who had done either a river cruise or a pilgrimage. So this is very, very good. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for all the wealth of knowledge that you've shared over the podcast, your website, your Facebook group, and the voice map tools. I really can't imagine having taken this trip without it. And quite frankly, your podcast reignited my interest in revisiting France sooner than later.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that makes me happy. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's really true. I've been listening to it for several years, and it was. So I don't know that I'd have gone to France this year if it hadn't been listening to your podcast. You made me listen so much. When this opportunity came up, we had to jump.
And you are very welcome. And I want you to know, to me, it makes no difference whether you come or not, because I don't it's not like I'm selling hotel rooms or whatever. I'm just someone who loves France and wants to tell you about it. So there you go. Merci beaucoup, Annie.
Thank you for having me. Merci à vous.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have been doing it for many years. Thank you so much. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Tom Montanez, Lisa Hoshikawa, Nicole Livengood, Lori Butler, and Adrienne. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. This week, I had a conversation with listener Lisa Leone, who found herself in a situation that, it didn't used to happen to vaccinated people anyway, before the Omicron variant took over the world. Her daughter tested positive for COVID at the end of their trip to Paris. This is something you need to consider before you fly to France, which is why I wanted to talk to her. Sure, the borders are open, but what would you do if this happened to you? Let's hear what happened. Bonjour, Lisa, and welcome to Join Us in France. I am talking to you today because you got stuck in France. I'm dying to hear what happened.
Being stuck in Paris sounds wonderful. It wasn't. We were supposed to fly home on December 31st. We were supposed to test the day before, which would be the 30th of December. So my husband, my daughter, and I went and tested on the 30th of December and honestly walked in thinking it'd be no problem. It's just one thing to cross off the list. The pharmacist told me immediately that our daughter was positive, and I was in shock.
Right.
Total shock. Not prepared at all for this.
I'm assuming that she's vaccinated?
She's vaccinated. We just didn't do the booster for her because it had been like 4.5 months.
Right.
Right. But she's fully vaccinated. My husband and I are fully vaccinated. Husband and I even have the booster.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we were so much in shock. We actually walked like right down the street to another pharmacy to test again because we didn't think it was real.
Sure.
And it also came up positive. So we were in such shock. And we went back to the hotel room trying to figure things out. Like, what are we going to do?
So did the pharmacist give you any instructions on what to do?
The first pharmacist only said we could test every 2 days. And that was literally it.
Okay.
So back at the hotel room, we started searching on our own for an Airbnb. We had no other instructions or what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I found an Airbnb. He said it was 500 meters just outside of the city, and I booked it. Right before I lost it, I booked it, and then we had to call the airline and change the flight.
Right. Was the airline helpful? Like, did they charge you any fees to change that flight?
They charged me. Yes. They were not helpful. No.
Wow. What airline was it?
It was American Airlines.
Mm.
I've even called them after we got home to see if they could help me out because it was based on COVID, help me out financially or give me a voucher.
Yeah.
And they said no.
Dang.
They absolutely said no. I was really upset. I mean, it's a big chunk of money that we had to pay. We had the money, but, now instead of a cushion that we had, it's gone.
Yeah. I suppose you and your husband could have flown home, but...
One of us. Yeah, there's no way I would leave her alone. She's 14.
Right, no.
No, I know, right? A lot of people are telling me, like, 14, she'd be... No.
No. No.
Right?
Yeah, no. So both of you decided to stay with her?
Yes. Yes. So, but we left the hotel. It was New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
It was packed, trying to leave the hotel. It was crowded, people coming in, trying to move over to the other Airbnb. It was not pleasant.
Yeah.
But we were able to get over to the other Airbnb, and then I had to find a grocery store before it got dark because it was New Year's, right? So that wasn't easy. We wound up eating like eggs and bread because it was all I could find for a quick moment.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said your Airbnb was 500 meters away from the city? I'm
trying to remember what it was called. It was called like Les Volets Pierre, something like that.
Okay.
It wasn't a difficult like city to move to, outside of the city. It wasn't that far. I just wasn't familiar with it, and so I didn't know where things were.
Right. And you couldn't have stayed at your hotel because it was fully booked?
Yes, it was fully booked.
Right. Yeah, New Year's Eve is a big weekend in Paris, and as a matter of fact, the prices of hotels go up a lot over that, the 30th, 31st, 1st and 2nd. You pay more for hotels, a lot more usually.
Yeah.
Because it's New Year's Eve.
Which is understandable, business-wise. You'd want to get a little bit more money
Sure.
out of it. But, yeah, right. It would have been nice to stay.
Yeah, but you couldn't. So did the pharmacist notify the French government in any way that you were positive?
No.
Okay.
No. They didn't notify the French government. There was literally like no governmental agency monitoring me.
Correct.
Nothing.
Right. So it's just the airline, like the ticket agent, asking you for your negative test that kept you from going home.
Correct.
If you had lived in another European country that you could drive to, you could have just gone home.
Correct. Yeah. I would have loved that.
Yeah, nobody was keeping you except the airline wasn't going to let you on.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that it's clear to everybody that this was at your own cost. Not only did you have to pay for the plane tickets, but you also had to support yourselves for the days when you were supposed to stay in Paris against your will, I guess.
Right. Against their will, yes. Yeah, totally 100% out of our pocket. We paid for everything. The airline, the Airbnb, the groceries, and testing, which was, I have to say on a side note, that was the wonderful of France to be able to go like basically every 200 feet to a pharmacy and spend 30 minutes in line to walk in, to pay, to get tested, to get a result. I loved that.
Yes, and also tests are not as expensive in France as they are in the US.
Correct.
Yeah, in France it's like $25 or 28 maybe, I don't remember. I don't have to pay for it because I'm in the French healthcare, so I don't have to pay for it. But
right. No, I paid 25 euros each time we tested.
Okay.
And I tested our daughter every 2 days because it had reached a point where I just wanted to go home.
Well, so when you booked your new airline ticket, did you book it for a specific date? How did you decide?
Right. We decided on the 10 days because we thought what we needed was a 10-day quarantine for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But then after like a day or two, we started to realize nobody was monitoring. And in America, the CDC had changed the rules from 10 days to 5 days.
And they have in France as well.
Right. So we tested negative actually on the 4th, which was 5 days later. So first I booked the airline for leaving on the 10th because that was 10 days.
Yeah.
When we tested negative on the 4th, I immediately picked up the phone, called the airline, and got out on the 5th.
Okay.
So I had to change the flight again.
Which caused you another expense, obviously.
Yes.
The joys.
Yeah, I know. We could have gone to Paris a second time for the amount of money we spent.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's terrible. And so were you able to do anything while you were just waiting to test out?
In a sense, no. What I would say was like, we're in Paris. You want to do something? And she said, no, I want to get rid of this. Let's stay inside.
Was she feeling sick at all?
No, it really looked like she had a very minor cold. She did not have a headache. She did not have a fever. Her stomach was fine, but there was some congestion in her nose. I think postnasal drip caused a little bit of coughing, but not a lot of coughing. Honestly, not a lot. Yeah.
And did you and your husband ever test positive, or was it just her the whole time?
It was just her the whole time. It was crazy.
Kids. You love them, but just
I know, right? And typically, from her growing up, my husband and I would always get sick whenever she got sick, but not this time.
Well, you were vaccinated and boosted. That's the thing with these vaccines. They work surprisingly well, and they worked for your daughter as well since she didn't feel very sick. It's just that she still tested positive, which is a bummer. And so you're the first person I've heard that this has happened to, but I think it does happen now with Omicron because it has the ability to get through unless you're boosted. And even for people who have had a previous infection, it seems like they are getting reinfected fairly easily with Omicron. So maybe people should really take this into consideration before booking a trip to France. What do you say to people when they tell you, oh, I'm thinking of going to France? What would you say?
I think right now, while we were there, the surge it definitely increased. We didn't think it would be a problem when we flew out. Right now, if I were to fly out in the next 2 days, week, I'd probably wait because it is so highly contagious, and you think you just have a cold. I've even read some news articles that say it looks like a cold. It's definitely not like the way the pandemic started, which is wonderful. People are not getting nearly as sick at that time or dying because of the pandemic, which is really, really wonderful. I don't know. I'd say for the moment I'd wait.
Right, but they are getting stuck at an Airbnb in Paris where they don't want to be and have to pay for, changing their airplane and all of this stuff. So it can get expensive. And did it cause you any trouble with your work situation?
No, fortunately, I was able to tell my work, like, I'm sorry, I'm stuck in Paris, right? And they were all able to help out and jump in, But most people were saying, oh, my gosh, how horrible, stuck in Paris, right? Like, well, it sounds good.
But not really.
But not really, yeah.
Okay, so you're able to laugh about it a little bit now. I'm sure it'll be a fantastic story a year from now when hopefully all of this is behind us. But I am very sorry this happened to you. And I think you're wise to say now may be a good time to not come to France for a few more weeks. Just let this wave pass.
Correct. Yes, I would wait a little bit. Definitely wonderful vacation. We loved every minute of it. Was not a great way to end, but this wave, I would wait for it to pass and then consider going.
Well, thank you so much for telling us all about this. And hopefully I'll have you back on the podcast to talk about that wonderful vacation you had before it all
We
went.
really did have a wonderful time. I would love to tell you more details about the week we were there. We had a wonderful time.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you again, Lisa, for helping us keeping it real. This is an evolving situation, obviously. I used to not worry about people testing positive at the end of their trip. Now it's a lot more likely, so keep that under consideration. I'm sure it will change again because that's what's happening a lot with this pandemic. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/372, the numeral. And if you scroll to the bottom of the episode page, you will see a blue button for the transcript and guest notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2022 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.